Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. We've all heard the rhyme, and we all know that it stems from a real woman who has long been suspected as the one who murdered her own parents with an axe. It's New England's most famous true crime story, and one that's given rise to a haunted house, numerous books, TV shows, and movies. It's iconic, it's outrageous, and it's one of America's first viral cases, all the way back in the 1800s. It's the case of Lizzie Borden. Let's get into it. Andrew and Sarah Borden had two daughters, Emma, born in 1851, and Lizzie, born in 1860. The Bordens were stinking rich, but no one would have said so looking in from the outside. Despite being worth around $15 million by today's standards, their modest home in Fall River, Massachusetts had no indoor plumbing and no electricity, even though it was available by then. While the Bordens' extended family lived lavishly in mansions with butlers, dinner parties, and all had the coveted social standing that came with pretty dresses and amenities, Andrew Borden, who was even more wealthy, lived, well, some say frugally, but most would agree that he was just the cheapskate. Personally, this place is huge in comparison to anything I've ever lived in, but I guess it was modest in comparison to what they could afford. Unfortunately, Sarah died young, when the girls were only 2 and 5 years old. Andrew remarried a woman named Abby soon after, and the girls did not like their stepmother at all. It's uncertain if Abby really was the terrible person that the girls made her out to be, or if it was just a case of teenagers being nasty, though media in recent years definitely portray Abby in the same vein as Cinderella's stepmother. Lizzie wasn't exactly the easiest teenager to keep house with either. Her friends and neighbors reported her to be ordinary, very sweet, and fascinated with animals. She had sticky fingers. Lizzie liked to visit shops and steal random items that she didn't need just for the thrill of it. Andrew didn't bother to discipline his daughter at all. Instead, he told the shop owners of Fall River just to let her take whatever she wanted and to put it on his tab. An odd choice of parenting that most would agree wouldn't be good for any kid's development. Lizzie was extremely active in the church. She taught Sunday school, spearheaded more than one initiative or charity, and she even served as treasurer on a few committees. Lizzie and Emma weren't happy about their father's frugality at all. Heck, if it weren't for their incessant begging, they wouldn't even have running water in their house. Despite their wealth, the girls owned only the necessary clothes. The house was sparsely furnished, and they were rarely allowed spending money unless you count Lizzie's pilfering at local shops. This actually caused more strife in the family than just a pair of girls interested in buying pretty dresses. Since women couldn't own property or businesses, Lizzie and Emma were expected to marry rich, but Andrew was unwilling to pay the appropriate dowries for them, meaning that proposals for courtships were few. Lizzie and Emma both still lived at home when they were 32 and 41 years old respectively. The women were resentful of their father, and what wealth and properties he did have would go to his wife, their stepmother Abby, whom they despised. For the girls, staying home may have been a way to monitor family assets and to assert their stake in the household. It wouldn't be the first time daughters chose to turn their backs on marriage to ensure that they at least had something of value to keep a roof over their heads when their main caregiver died. It all came to a boil when Andrew started gifting entire properties to extended family without consulting the girls or caring whether they might have wanted the property themselves. Emma took more vacations to visit family to get away from the house. Lizzie wouldn't eat dinner with any of them, and everyone in town was aware of the family's drama. In August of 1892, Emma was away on one of her many visits, and Lizzie, Abby, and Andrew were down with food poisoning. Many believed that the Bordens were all poisoned by Lizzie, but they had been eating from the same pot of soup for the past 4 days because E. coli and salmonella apparently weren't a thing yet in the 1800s. The maid, Bridget, admitted to being the one who cooked the soup herself, and she got sick from it too. By the 4th, the family had barely left the house in 4 days. But they were feeling well enough for an uncle to visit them that morning and for Andrew to take his usual walk around the block that afternoon. Andrew returned home after a few hours and took a nap on the couch on the first floor while his wife straightened up the upstairs and Lizzie ironed some clothes. Late afternoon, Lizzie walked out of her house and accosted the first person she saw, a neighbor named Adelaide Churchill. Lizzie hailed her down, telling Adelaide that her father had been murdered and that she just found his body. Police records back then weren't great, so there's no way to know what state Lizzie was in. But a note was made that Lizzie's clothes were spotless, not a single drop of blood on her. When Adelaide went inside to investigate, she emerged screaming for the police just seconds later. Inside, police found Andrew still on the couch. He'd been bludgeoned no less than 11 times, the blows mostly centered around his face. Upstairs in the guest bedroom was Abby, who'd apparently been in the middle of cleaning up. Abby was hit from behind first and was then subjected to 19 separate blows. The scene was incredibly horrific, and both victims' faces were virtually pulverized under a weapon that police suspected was a hatchet or an axe. The blood spatter reached the roof, pooled on the floor, and ran down the walls, but only around the bodies. Whoever had done this should have been covered in blood. The arterial spray alone would have left them looking like Carrie after she got dunked with a bucket of pig's blood at the prom. Yet no blood trail was found anywhere in the house. And Lizzie certainly didn't have any blood on her either. Obviously, this was a time before DNA, fingerprints, and microscopic evidence, but they could at least determine that Abby died first a whole hour and a half before Andrew was killed, meaning that Abby was most likely already dead when Andrew returned home from his walk. Apparently, through all of this, Lizzie, who was ironing in a back room of the house, didn't hear a thing. Upon searching Lizzie, they found a drop of blood on her undergarments. Lizzie claimed to be on her menstrual cycle. Besides, 3 other layers of dresses over her garments had no blood on it at all. So how else would it have gotten there unless it was her period? Not that any doctor was brought in to examine Lizzie to confirm this. Back then, such an invasion of a woman's privates would be too much of an obscenity to even mention it out loud. And to suggest doing so while she was bleeding, goodness gracious. Such filth wasn't even discussed in those brothels and bars next to the railway line, never mind in proper company like a court of law. In the attic, they found a hatchet inside a box of other tools. The hatchet had its wooden handle broken off, and the stump that was left had ash on it. Police suspected that the killer had broken off the blood-soaked handle because wood would absorb the blood, and when it didn't break off completely, the rest was charred in a fire to remove the evidence. Needless to say, Lizzie was their one and only suspect. She was the only one who was home when the murders happened, and in an hour and a half, she didn't hear the attacks at all. Her guilt was only further implicated 4 days later, because Lizzie was seen burning a dress. Records aren't clear about who saw her or where she was when she burnt it, but Lizzie did admit to this. She claimed that she'd spilled paint all over the dress, and since it was old and she had no use for it anymore, she just burned it instead. Never mind the fact that Lizzie and Emma didn't exactly have closets brimming with clothes, and handmade dresses were expensive back then. A little more digging unearthed the recent changes to Andrew's will. It came out that Abby was going to inherit virtually everything, except for the house. That was going to go to the eldest sister, Emma, meaning that Lizzie would inherit no real estate at all. Both Andrew's daughters were going to receive a cash inheritance, but compared to the enormous value in properties that he owned, this was a meager sum. Not to mention the fact that Lizzie was reported to be asking around town for prussic acid in the days leading up to the murders. Prussic acid's some hardcore stuff, usually used in industrial applications and to fumigate the living daylights out of cockroaches. A version of it was used in the gas chambers in Nazi concentration camps. Even back then, when controlling lethal poisons wasn't a thing, no doctor or pharmacist would give it to her. Lizzie claimed that she wanted to treat their seal skin coats with it. Prussic acid has no use for treating leather at all, so this was a lame excuse that police didn't buy either. Another substance that wasn't regulated very well was morphine, and Lizzie was being prescribed copious amounts of it to treat her stress, trauma, and the terrible ordeal of being hauled in for questioning by police. She was so drugged out that most of her responses during interrogations were slurred, jumbled, and completely incoherent. Regardless of her obvious muddled mental state, police charged her with the double murder that had lit the nation on fire on August the 11th. It took 8 months before her case went to trial, and by then, Lizzie was practically a celebrity. The crime was incredibly gruesome, worse than most people had ever heard of, and not only were the victims rich, their own daughter was the one being charged with a crime that no woman had ever been accused of. The public's view that women couldn't possibly do such a hideous thing had a great impact on this case. Lizzie was privileged, slight of build, and well put together. not the kind of lady who'd resort to such a manly, barbaric act. A point Lizzie proved when her father and stepmother's skulls were brought out to compare the wounds to the hatchet. She fainted on the spot and had to be revived by medical professionals. The vast majority of the public were convinced of her innocence, simply based on the fact that she was a woman, and this undoubtedly affected the jury's opinion too. After a 3-week trial, it took them only 2 hours to decide that Lizzie was innocent, and the crowd outside erupted in cheers and celebration. Lizzie and Emma each received approximately $10 million in today's money, and since their father had given away most of his properties rather than leave it to his daughters, they sold the house and got their mansion on top of the hill and filled it with servants and finery, just like they'd always wanted. Their relationship fractured after a few years, and Emma took her things and moved out, leaving Lizzie alone in a town that had all but decided that she was guilty of murder. Lizzie was banned from her old church. No book club or women's gathering wanted her to attend, and her solitary existence was shared only with her 3 beloved Boston Terriers. She never married, never had any friends, and despite getting the life that she had always wanted, Lizzie was doomed to live that life completely alone. She changed her name to Lizbeth in her later years, but no one seemed to know why. Her surname was still Borden, so it couldn't have been to separate herself from her family. Emma later alluded that there was an extreme abuse in the house and that she and Lizzie were subjected to terrible things, though what those terrible things were, Emma never disclosed. By separating actual statements from the wild rumors are almost impossible all these years later, so who knows what's true anymore. Lizzie died in 1927 at the age of 66 of pneumonia, and she was buried without much fanfare or mourning. It wasn't even announced in the newspaper. 9 days later, Emma died of kidney failure, and they were both laid to rest next to Andrew and their stepmother, Abby. She left a sizable amount of money behind to ensure that her Boston Terriers would be taken care of until their dying day. $600,000 was left to the Fall River Animal Society. She put down $10,000 towards the care of her father, stepmother, sister, and her own graves when she was no longer alive to tend to them. More people visit Lizzie's childhood home and her grave in a single month than anyone ever visited her during her lifetime. Most people agree that Lizzie probably did it, and I'm one of them. It just goes to show how much the lack of forensics and the culture of thinking that women are the weaker sex can decide the outcome of a verdict before the case even makes it to trial. Or do you think I'm full of it and Lizzie was completely innocent? Well, you know the drill by now. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And remember to like and subscribe while you're at it. And before I go, shout out to Fifi Honeyblossom. I see you in the comments. You're a real one. Cheers, people.